Welcome to the podcast, Raising Unstoppable Teens. I'm Dr. Kimberly Shear, teen breakthrough expert and host of the show. I am honored to have as my guest Ann Moss Rogers. So welcome, Ann, to the show.
Thank you. And you got to call me Ann Moss. It's a double name. It's a Southern thing.
Oh, Ann Moss?
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
I like that a lot. That's gorgeous. Okay. So I would like to read her bio. She is actually known as the emotionally naked speaker. How clever is that? So I'd like to read her bio so that our listeners can learn a little bit more about you. So Ann Moss Rogers is a national emotionally naked TEDx storyteller, award-winning author of Diary of a Broken Mind, and owner of the popular Emotionally Naked blog. She is a marketing expert who co-owned and later sold her digital marketing business to pursue grief education and suicide prevention after her 20-year-old son, Charles, died by suicide June 5th, 2015. Her blog, Emotionally Naked, has reached over 1 million people on subjects about suicide, grief, addiction, and mental illness. She is a trainer for the evidence-based program, Selftalk, a 4-hour workshop on suicide prevention, and she is a board member for NAMI in Virginia. Originally from Fayetteville, North Carolina, a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and currently lives in Richmond, Virginia, with her husband, Randy. Her son, Richard, is a filmmaker, writer, and film editor in Los Angeles. So again, welcome to the show. I'm honored to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me today, Kimberly. I really appreciate it.
Welcome. We're going to dive into some questions. And my first question is what I ask all my guests, and that is to share a little bit about what life was like for you as a teenager.
You know, that I think it's tough for everyone, but I remember at the age of 15, being a teenager was very lonely for me. And that was because a number of my friends were starting to become sexually active, and they were kind of throwing themselves in relationships, and they were smoking pot, and I didn't want to do either of those two things. So I kind of got left on the sidelines. And so for about 1.5 years, I did a lot of babysitting, and I made checkbook covers for a local gift shop. But it was very lonely for me. I felt very isolated, and that was difficult. I ended up having a diving accident. I dove into a lake and I broke my neck, and I spent, weeks in the hospital and had to wear a neck brace, and then we had to move somewhere else. So I had to move to this new school in a neck brace, which to teenagers pretty devastating. Mm-hmm. But the difference between me and a lot of my friends was that I actually had more confidence than most teenagers have. Mm-hmm. And I started doing something at the age of 15, which I think psychologists actually call something, but it's positive self-talk. Mm-hmm. And I could be like this alter ego that asked me questions that were my fears, but we had to end up in agreement. And my own self wasn't allowed to beat up myself, if that makes any sense.
It does.
And because what I figured was, there are plenty of people out there that will tear me apart. I don't need to be one of them. Mm-hmm. I need to be my own cheerleader. And I started that at the age of 15. Mm-hmm. And that is a strategy I took through my whole life. And I didn't realize it until I lost my son to suicide, that I had been doing that for decades.
Mm.
And that really helped me through the teen years. And, you know, there were times I struggled. I remember my first year in college in particular, that transition was really, really hard for me. But I think it's hard for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So, but I remember feeling very alone in that regard at the time.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing though, because that takes a lot of, I guess I want to say you were really ahead of the game, because to me that's takes a lot of mindful, conscious practice to not beat yourself up. I mean, to me, I feel like that those the negative self-talk can seem so automatic, and to be 15 years old and just to have that awareness or realization, like I don't need to beat my own self up, like, you know, I need to be my cheerleader, I need to be, you know, giving myself positive self-talk. That's truly amazing. I mean, that just came to you, you weren't taught it, or was it, you know,
No,
role modeled for you, or
no, I was just very isolated. And I remember one day picking on different parts of my body. No, I was with a group of ladies or young ladies, teenagers, and they were all picking on their body parts. And I was doing the same. I hate my thighs. I hate this. I hate that. And I went home and I thought, why do I always feel so bad after these conversations? And then I recognized a pattern. It was when I got together with people and we would beat up on ourselves and our bodies and all that, that we started to feel like crap. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not participating. If I'm there, everybody else can talk about it, but I'm not participating because it only makes me feel worse about myself. You know, I do the best I can.
mm-hmm.
And there's certain things you can't change about your God-given self.
Right.
I was very, very, you know, I was really tall for my age. I was 5'10".
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you know, even in middle school, I was taller than most of the boys. Now that would change a little later, but you know, it's just awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned to accept myself. And that was an important step. And I have to also wonder how much of it had to do with the broken neck. I learned a lot in that process. And one of the things I learned, I remember being in the hospital, and there was a young man whose father had lit him on fire with gasoline. And he would come to our room every single day and tell us jokes and make us laugh. Now I was in traction, I couldn't move. I just loved this kid. And at night they would bathe him and scrape his skin off, and you could hear him scream. And then he would come in the next day all excited and talking and all bubbly. And I'm like, man, I can't complain about my situation. My family loves me. I have parents that support me. They visit me every single day. And this kid, nobody ever came and visited him.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, if that kid can come in this room with a smile on his face, there is no excuse for me. And I think that really did reset a lot of my thinking.
Very inspirational, and I think also very remarkable. So very powerful as well. Okay, so how and why did you become a suicide prevention advocate?
I think for me, I'm a little on the obsessive side. And before my son died, I was just really into my digital marketing business. And after he died, I could have cared less. And I kept thinking that passion's going to come back, but it didn't. And the morale in my business, you know, of my employees was just really sinking because they could tell I wasn't invested.
Mm-hmm.
So it was time for me to pull out. And I had a business partner, thank goodness. So he was kind of doing most of the heavy lifting at that point. So it wasn't fair to him either. And I guess I really made that decision once I'd written a blog post about a girl named Lauren. No, about my son. And I wrote it right before the first death anniversary. And it detailed us getting the news and how we heard the news. And I mean, it's just a really agonizing post by a grieving mother. And I thought, and I was embarrassed that I published it. And I did publish it, and I called it the final 48 hours, but I didn't share it. But I had subscribers, and they shared it. And the first day, like 20,000 people came to the website to read it. And I'm like, how would they want to read this? Mm-hmm. And then I got a message from a girl named Lauren, and it said, 2 days ago, I thought about taking my life. Reading a post from a mother who's felt such devastating pain has changed my perspective on life. And that was it for me. That was a turning point for me, because that young lady reached out to her own parents and asked for help. Mm-hmm. She's graduated from college. She's bought a car. She has a job. And I'm like, all I did was write something and validate her wish to tell. Mm-hmm. I didn't know people wanted to tell, or that they hinted, or they were trying to tell people they were thinking of suicide. And they say all these things that we don't translate mm-hmm. to, oh, they're thinking about killing themselves, until we've been trained to understand that.
Right.
And I said, the universe is pulling me in this direction, mm-hmm. and I got to go that way. So I did. And I sold my business, and so I made a lot of money, and then I made nothing. Woohoo! And I'm like, fortunately, I was in the position to do so. I mean, I wouldn't have been 5 years earlier, mm-hmm. because his treatment cost so much. Our bank account was hovering above poverty. Mm-hmm. But by this time, I'd sold the business. My husband had gotten a much better job, and he was able and still able to support me. Because book writing isn't paying all that much. But I've had some good speaking engagements, both in person and online. But definitely my schedule got cleared out once the pandemic hit, like everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I have chills just hearing your story, and I'm gonna try not. I always well up, but
it's okay. I do too.
Yeah, what the work that you're doing is saving lives. I mean, like this example. This is just one of many stories, I'm sure, that read your blog, and she felt validated, like somebody understood, and that perhaps encouraged or gave her the courage to go to her parents, and that just or for her to get help, turned everything around. I mean, in just in just a few days. I mean, like like she said a couple days ago, it could have been horrendous. And
right.
Yeah. Wow.
And it basically was the first of now hundreds of messages and several blog posts. If you watch my TED Talk, kind of Blog Save Lives, you'll get an idea of some of the digital marketing strategies I use to save lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell us more about Charles and who he was.
Oh, wow. He was such an awesome, funny kid, very effervescent. So he would walk into a room and all eyes would turn towards him, like, he was bringing sunshine in his pocket and he was there to hand it out. Just a really big personality. He was funny. He was a creative genius. He was also frustrating and stubborn and relentless when he wanted something. And he also could never be filled up. It was kind of like he was always trying to be satiated, and it just always fell short. So mundane everyday life just didn't do it for him. And unfortunately, he developed depression as an adolescent. And when that happened, he started struggling with thoughts of suicide. And so he started using drugs and alcohol as his antidote. And the mental health system, you know, we made appointments, we tried to get assessments, and basically they shamed him and they shamed me. So he became very jaded of the mental health system, feeling like, hey, what I'm doing works much faster and much better. Mm-hmm. And it's just so hard to see this effervescent, bubbly kid who's just everybody's favorite person. He loved to dress up. He had a famous YouTube channel. He was on the homecoming court as a sophomore. He was great on stage. And just to see your child self-destruct that last 5 years, that alone was agony. Mm-hmm. And we had to kidnap him out of his bed and send him to a wilderness program. Not exactly plan A. So he spent some 22 months outside of our home in some kind of placement, but he still loved us. Mm-hmm. And when he hugged you, you felt like you got a social promotion. I mean, my gosh, it just held my heart hostage. Mm-hmm. He's real tall and skinny, floppy, curly hair, really, really cute, handsome. All the girls loved him. And boy, do I miss him. I miss him a lot.
Yeah. Wow. Just have to pause for a moment there. Boy.
I do that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why shouldn't we be using the phrase committed suicide?
I know it's been in our lexicon for hundreds of years, since the 1400s England. But if you go back to that time of 1400s England, it was a crime to suicide. And if you had a relative that died by suicide, you were charged, the family was, and they would drag the body through town as an example, and then they would take all that person's worldly possessions and they were given to the crown, because this was in England. So that phrase has stuck in our lexicon for hundreds of years, committed, because it was a crime, but it's no longer a crime. It's a public health issue. And it has been recognized as such by the World Health Organization, the National Institute of Mental Health, and the Department of Defense. And we need to start talking about it like that, because we start to stigmatize it more by saying committed. Mm-hmm. And that's why we say died by suicide, took his own life, killed himself. All those are reasonable things to say. Mm-hmm. But committed, we're trying to push that on out, and it's going to take a while. Mm-hmm. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, but it has to start somewhere, and words are powerful, and you know, the stigma, and as you say, the shame and all of that. If we can, you know, just become more aware and maybe use different phrasing too. I mean, I'm like, you know, like what you're saying, it's a public, you know, health issue. It's not, you know, it's not a crime.
Right.
So it kind of changes the mindset as well, as you speak it differently.
It does. So. And that's the point, Kimberly, is that it changes the mindset, and people who struggle with thoughts of suicide, when you use the appropriate language, it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. It really does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So how can conversation on this topic prevent suicide?
Well, a lot of people think that talking about suicide gives people the idea.
Right.
And that's just not true. And it's been proven by multiple studies at this point. And we know that talking about suicide in a thoughtful and sensitive way can actually encourage people to reach out for help. And we call that help-seeking behavior. So it encourages help-seeking behavior. Now with teens and adolescents, we don't want to talk about method, and we don't want to make, like, I am not painting Charles. When I speak to schools, I'm not painting him as some huge hero. I am talking about a child who was wonderful, but also stubborn and had demons and made mistakes. And, you know, lost his battle with depression. So I'm just really very honest and vulnerable about that, instead of, you know, because I don't want to create this hero out of him, but have them kind of understand that suicide is permanent. And we don't, you know, you got to think about it. And if you're struggling with thoughts of suicide, it's important that you reach out for help and tell a trusted adult. So that's always my message. What do I do about a friend who is thinking of suicide or cutting? Tell a trusted adult. Listen with empathy, and, you know, tell a trusted adult. I think that's one of the most important parts of it.
I definitely agree. And I like what you're saying about the vulnerability and really being authentic, I guess. Like you're not painting Charles as this, you know, superhero or something. You're being authentic and genuine with who he is. But I think that helps other teenagers and other people to be able to more relate to it. And almost in that message is almost like it's okay. Like there's other people that have thought about suicide or whatever. It's okay. Go ask for help. Versus, oh, well, you know, either we're not talking about it, so you just kind of bottle up. And I think then the message, in a way, an implied message is to feel shame about it. You know, don't speak it. Don't talk about it. And so people aren't going to ask for help if they have those feelings. So, and then also if you build someone up as a hero, then it's almost like, well, that isn't me, you know, or maybe not even feeling validated. So just being
Or they look at it as like, oh, wow, you know, he killed himself and look how famous he's become. I should do that too. So I have to navigate around that. So it's 1/3 my story when I speak to high schools. 1/3 I tell them about my grief journey, and I am telling them how much it hurt and how I managed that pain. And I say, I'm up here today talking to you. How is it that I made it from the most devastating and agonizing loss of my life to being able to stand before you today and tell this story? And I'm going to tell you how I did it. And they're very intrigued. They hang on. And I tell them, you know, my story. And then the last 1/3 is all about them. And we talk about healthy and unhealthy coping strategies. And I also have them put Post-it notes. So everybody in the class puts up a Post-it note about how they're feeling or some problem they've dealt with in the last 6 months. Like, you know, I struggle with my body image. I broke up with my boyfriend. I lost my dad. My uncle is incarcerated. You know, my brother died in a car accident. And when you step back and look at all of them, once they put their individual notes up, and when they step back and I start reading them, and I, you know, say, did you know 2 people in this room were raped? 2 people in this room were victims of incest. 3 people have a close relative that's incarcerated. Then they start to cry because they had no idea their peers were going through all this.
Right.
And it's just a reality check. I don't ever say, I never say you are not alone. I really don't like that phrase because I think it's important for us to make them feel not alone, to do things that demonstrate that they're not alone, so that they make that discovery on their own. So I never say it. I let them experience it. And they come up with that, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. You know, I'm not trying to put that in their head. They're coming up with it on their own.
And I think that's more powerful.
It is, because when they feel they've made that discovery on their own, it sticks with them.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's a great reminder. It's also a great exercise really for any of us, because we're so in our own worlds most of the time. And when even the slightest of things that happen, we're not really thinking about, we think it's happened to us, how somehow we're kind of like a victim to it. You don't know what all is going on in anybody else's world, where they're at, and their experiences, and why maybe they might have even behaved that way, or what's going on. And so it's important to remember that, I think, as a general rule, as best we can, to try to think that, it's not just about us and our world and our experiences, that we're all human and we have, others have things going on too. And that could be more of the influence to certain actions than it has anything really to do with us. And I guess to be more aware or sensitive to that. I don't know. I just think that's a fabulous exercise, to know that we aren't alone, and most of us have hardships and experiences that are very painful.
Right. And 98% of people's attitude towards you, if they're angry or if they're short with you, rarely has anything to do with you. Right. 98% of the time, it's something going on in their lives. So by recognizing that, it's really helped me, because sometimes, I've got a lot of things online, and there's a YouTube video, and a lot of young men in particular, when they leave, they'll be pissed off and angry, and they'll say all kinds of just rip-roaring nasty things, kind of bullying like. But I recognize they're in a lot of pain. I mean, anybody that says all that stuff, this could be anywhere from a 10 to an 18-year-old. I always answer with the utmost respect, like, I know you're hurting, and I'm so sorry you are. Is there anything you'd like to tell me about your pain? And they will turn around. I'd say 99% of the time, somebody comes back and they apologize, and I said, that's okay. You're feeling the worst you've ever felt in your whole life. I don't expect you to be sweet Patty Sunshine, jump through a meadow carrying daisies. You're feeling awful. I'm not nice when I'm in pain.
Right.
And I don't expect a young man or a young woman to be too. Some people are sadder, but I've just noticed that with young men, some that suffer from depression, it's more about anger.
Yeah.
Than it is, because my dad suffered from depression and I didn't know it, but he was always angry. I never saw him sad, but those anger outbursts were that he was irritated, because he felt badly.
I love that. I mean, two things that come up for me is, one, I think sometimes, we're conditioned. I think boys in general have been conditioned. I think that's changing now with emotional intelligence and so forth, but anger has been acceptable, whereas crying and sadness and some of those other feelings have not been. So the only way for them to release the pain or to, express it is through those very, anger outbursts, right? But the other thing that, again, this isn't anything new, what I appreciate the reminder. It just kind of again connected for me a little in, again. So hopefully what do I say, becomes a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And that is when you say that they're in pain. And, when you think about the physical pain, if you've got the flu or a headache, or we aren't ourselves, we are irritable. But that hidden, more emotional pain, same thing. And I didn't, I know that when I think about it logically, but you just kind of made kind of a reminder of it in my body that yeah, pain is pain, whether it's invisible or visible, and you're not going to be at your best. Um, and we do look for some kind of release,
We do.
even no matter, even if it's maladaptive, but just to have some release from it. So to kind of think about it that way. Anyway, it's helpful for me.
Because your brain doesn't know the difference between
Right.
physical pain and mental pain. It's all cake batter to your brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we may separate out in these neat little silos, but pain is pain, and it's all blended together because when you are, let's say you just had knee surgery, you're not nice when you're in pain. So it has a mental component and a physical component, and almost everything does.
Right. Right. Well, and also you think too about a lot of our emotional pain does show up through our body.
It
Um,
does.
right. So that's one of the things that also I think is important. And again, it doesn't necessarily come naturally, but kind of paying attention to the signals in our body and what might be going on, or what emotion, or where we're feeling that anxiety, or where we're feeling certain things, because our body not feeling well is also a clue, too.
And adolescents haven't learned that yet.
Yeah.
I mean, their brains are still developing, and
Right.
they're at a point in their life where, those executive functions just don't exist yet.
No,
And that's why we need to teach more of those coping skills in school.
that's right. Absolutely. And just continue to bring more awareness to that. Absolutely. So thank you for that. It's very, very true. Um, so you had mentioned this a little bit. So what do you tell people? I mean, you're up on stage and you are sharing your story, and how you kind of, I mean, how is it that you can speak about this and not completely fall apart?
Well, I do have a history as a public speaker because when I owned my own business, and even before then, I used to do a lot of work on stage in plays and things like that. And I also did a lot with my business where I would, as a lead generator to speak about social media on steroids, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a women in business, supporting women in business kind of presentation, and I love that. And then after my son died, I just switched my topics. But the first one, I thought, oh man, can I do this? And for me, and it was very soon after he died, and most guidelines say wait 2 years. But what happened was when I went out on stage, I felt my son with me because he was amazing on stage. And once I felt him with me, I was done. I was addicted. And I also did the hard work to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked for support, and I didn't just join one support group, I joined 2. I started the blog Emotionally Naked. I wrote 1 or 2 posts a day. So there are 1,500 posts on that site. And that is me working through this. And then I wrote a 288-page book. So writing was a big part of me working through all of it. And it hurt to write.
Mm-hmm.
What I recognized at the end of the day, I would feel this release, and I would start to see patterns, and I would start to feel something happening. And when I felt something happening, I just kind of grabbed a hold of it and I said, I'm going to do this. I did a lot of exercise. I went outside, I ran, and I did something every single day. And again, I looked for support. And I have my book group, which kind of didn't want to really hear that much about Charles and what I was going through. They could listen to it for about 5 minutes and then they wanted to talk about other stuff. And that was fine. So that was kind of my escape group. Mm-hmm. And then I had my group of moms outside the support group. So I still had a group of people in the support group that I can contact at any time, still today, and we still do it, when I'm having a tough day, because all of us understand that we're walking alongside grief for the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. And what we had to learn was to incorporate grief into our lives. And at first it was this ugly, awful thing that was painful. But now it's the only time we have to the one we love. So we cuddle up with it. Mm-hmm. But some days are more difficult than others. Mm-hmm. And you just have to understand that rhythm over time. Mm-hmm. But all those things I did helped me cope and get to where I was able to stand up and deliver that message. Mm-hmm. I decided not to drink. I decided not to do any substances because I saw people that did that and they were stuck. So 7 years later, they wouldn't have progressed. Mm-hmm. The people I saw that seeked out support, they went to groups, they worked at it. Mm-hmm. They seemed to make the progress. Mm-hmm. And there's no timeline to this. I mean, everybody's timeline is different. And it depends on personality, it depends on what happened, just a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of people struggle with the faith piece. Some people dive right into faith, and then other people are like, why did God let this happen? Mm-hmm. And so people have to work through those as well. And I knew I didn't want to be angry and bitter my whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you bring up some really good points in that. One, again, I just want to clarify the exercise, the writing, and then support. Those are like three of the, top key things that can really be helpful to process and to move forward, I guess. But, somebody else, it might be some other kind of way to grieve and also to process through their emotions. And also knowing that there's going to be, grief is just a strange thing, because where I was going, I didn't finish my sentence, but there are days, like you said, that can be worse than others. And I just wanted to share a bit. When my mother passed away, that was my first experience actually with death or loss. We rehomed, my dad would rehome our animals, so I never ever had the experience, and I grieved for a long time with my mother. And one of the things for me that I loved to do was to go into the stores, the shopping stores that we went to together. Yeah. Because I felt her presence there. I was in that moment of time. It really was a peaceful, it was a pleasant experience. So I would purposely go into those stores, or, the places we had visited frequently, because that brought her into my presence, yeah. I guess. So I'm kind of relating to that idea a bit of, with Charles being with you on stage. Yeah. And that was it. You're it's just such a wonderful feeling feeling his presence, and you're there together, you know, delivering and saving lives through your speaking, really. Um, but then on the other hand, when you were saying, you know, some days are worse than others, my mother passed away in 2003, and Labor Day was the day that I learned that she only had a couple of weeks to live. So we weren't at all prepared. And there are some Labor Days I'm fine. There are others that I just cry and I'm sad. And then I realize, oh, this was when I found out my mom wouldn't have much longer to live. Like it's almost like my body reacted before my mind even pieced it together. And it's sporadic, but it is what it is, and you deal with it, and with support, as you say.
So you were pretty young when she died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And then, you know, my father, you know, I don't know, just things. It's a weird thing, and I'm like, he's relatively healthy. I can see some decline, but I know it's inevitable, right? I mean, for us all. But I'm like, there are some nights I get really sad, and I didn't realize about anticipatory grief.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I'm doing, and have been doing actually for the past year. But
those of us who had a child with addiction are very very well acquainted with anticipatory grief.
yeah, it's bizarre. So, but I know that's something that you also, I want to talk a little bit. I think that's even you discuss a little bit. Is it in the book that you already have out, Diary of a Broken Mind, A Mother's Story, A Son's Suicide, and the Haunting Lyrics He Left Behind is the title. And do you, in that book, are you talking a little bit about the grief?
Oh yeah. So here's the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I do talk about the grief journey, and I talk about forgiving myself, because those of us who've lost a child, particularly those of us who've lost one to suicide or drug-related illness, suffer a lot with the coulda, woulda, shouldas. You know, we miss the signs. We could have saved them if only, because suicide is treatable and preventable. You know, and it didn't happen with us. You know, our children did die. And so I do talk about my grief journey and how I talk about my alter ego. I talk about the support groups and the writing. And, you know, I make no bones about it. I had some very difficult days. There were days I was on the bottom of the shower, or I couldn't remember steps. I couldn't concentrate. So where I screwed up would, like, I'd be walking in the shower with my pajamas on because I forgot that you take your clothes off before you get in the shower. And then I'd be all wet and everything's soaking wet. And, you know, everything was backwards. You know, I'd put on shoes and forget to put on socks. So I had trouble putting things in sequence. I couldn't make anything because if it had more than 2 ingredients, it wasn't happening. Thank God people brought over meals. So this book was a cathartic experience, and it started being written in my head the day after his death. Before his death, I had written a book in my head of him being on stage and in recovery, and I was so proud. And patting other parents on the back saying, see, this could be your child one day. And then after it, you know, that dream evaporated. And so when I sat down to write it, I guess 18 months later, the structure was already in my head. I mean, I knew exactly what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And I knew I wanted to include his rap lyrics to show his viewpoint of the story from his point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And the songs are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to have them in there. And, you know, our mistakes are in there.
Mm-hmm.
And there are parts of those songs and parts that I wanted to take out because I didn't want you to see that side of me or my child, but I left them in. That wasn't easy. But I did because I thought, if I'm going to be vulnerable, I've got to really be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm going to pause for a moment. Wow. It's very, very heavy, I guess, in the sense because I can understand the vulnerability and the courage, and yet the impact that will have on the readers. Whereas I don't think you would have the same impact and influence if maybe you took out some of those lyrics and you know, and that was his voice, and there's so much to be gained from hearing from his perspective. So
I mean, it's truly an emotionally naked book. And when you read it, and I knew this, but I love it when other people say to me, I have read nothing like this ever.
mm-hmm.
And I don't think there is a book like it ever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, it was important for me to make it good and intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people said I couldn't put it down. And then a lot of people, some people have to take breaks. Like, you know, I got to take a break because I've got trigger warnings all through the book because that's what's necessary, you know, to warn people that method is mentioned. And if you're not in that frame of mind right now, walk away. Walk away. You're more important to me than this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it definitely is intriguing. I'm definitely going to read it, purchase it. It also won an International Book Award finalist, right?
Yes.
It's a Reader's Choice Award finalist and a 2020 nominee for the Virginia Library Literary Award as well. So
yeah, which is a pretty big shot because
yeah,
that is, you know, they give that to history books. They certainly don't give it to books about suicide.
right.
So I've won a lot of awards that people who write those kind of books don't traditionally win.
Mm-hmm.
I feel really good about
Yeah, you should.
that. Like I said, I put everything in it.
Yeah, well, and I think so many of us need to hear it and read it. And speaking of that, where can our listeners find the book? I'm assuming on Amazon and
Barnes and Noble
mm-hmm.
and Fountain Bookstore and my publisher, Beach Glass Books. So if you get it from Beach Glass, you don't have to pay shipping.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
that's a benefit.
That is a benefit. Well, that's why I'm going to order my copy.
Okay.
Awesome. And then this is really intriguing as well. You have a new book that you're currently working on, and the anticipated date for it, release date is, was it August 2021? Or,
yes. Right.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about what that's about, who's it for, and
my new book is Emotionally Naked, A Teacher's Guide to Preventing and Recognizing Students at Risk for Suicide. I had a much shorter title, but the publisher wanted a title packed with keywords. So the publisher is Jossie Bass, which is a division of Wiley Publishing, and they do a lot of educational books. Mm-hmm. So what we've included are other ideas that teachers and counselors have used in their classroom to kind of shift the culture from I'm lecturing you and teaching you, to a culture of letting kids connect and speak up, taking 5 minutes and doing a mental health check-in, setting expectations that during the semester we are going to fail. And that's okay, because that's where we learn.
Okay.
And we're not going to give ourselves grief and other people grief for that. Because again, that's where the most growth happens. So, and there are fancier things that people have done, projects and small shifts. And then, you know, we're including things like you should have a commemoration policy, because what happens when is you have a student who dies in an accident, you have one that dies by suicide. At the end of the year, people want to put the student who's in an accident, commemorate them in the yearbook, and they don't do it for the child that dies by suicide. And that starts to stigmatize that death. And then you have students resentful, and it's just a bad practice. But to have a commemoration policy that treats all deaths the same, and you know, that you grieve in that community, but you don't give more time and attention to one death and ignore this one because you think, oh, I need to ignore it because I don't want other students to suicide. So there, and then that shifts based on culture and ethnicity. So to make those policies based on the population that you serve. And, you know, I've talked to a school counselor in Alaska, and that is the Yupik community of Alaska Natives. And his approach is very different than an independent school in Massachusetts. So I've got both those different quotes from those school counselors on how they manage postvention, prevention, and intervention with different student populations. And then we have a lot of comments from students about how they feel. And then I have a lot of my data, and Kim O'Brien, PhD, my co-author, has a lot of her data as well, working with mostly student athletes, but high school and middle school students. So it is a very different book than anything else out there. And it's got a lot of emotionally naked stuff, you know, and it's less researchy than the, you know, we're citing a million sources still. Not my favorite part.
Right.
It's a little geeky.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's been an adventure. And about a month ago, this book was pretty ugly, but as of today, I'm like starting to see the pieces of the 5,000 piece puzzle come together, which feels pretty good.
Yes, and congratulations on really both works. That's just absolutely amazing, and I think so necessary. And I think one of the things I love, the idea about, you know, whether the death is by accident or by suicide, that, you know, we're really recognizing both students and because I think with suicide, there's still, and again, which I think your books are helping us with, to educate and bring more awareness and really kind of normalize it, if you will, for lack of a better word.
No, that's actually the perfect word.
Okay.
You're normalizing the conversation, and that is exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, because I think there's still just that uncomfortableness. Because here's the thing, it's kind of twisted a bit for me, is like suicide is preventable. And when we do learn about the warning signs and learn about, you know, how to respond, or just, you know, those, just even that can be so incredibly helpful. But it's almost like we're scared to do that. Like there's almost like like, oh, I don't know how to respond. I don't know what to say. Whereas if it's by accident, by a car accident, let's say, um, you're not, it's kind of, it's happened and you're sorry and you can be there to listen and support. Whereas with suicidal warning signs, for example, there's actually, you can take action, but it's scary,
It
especially
is
when you
very
don't
scary.
know how to respond. And I think that's why, one of many reasons your book is so powerful for coaches, teachers, parents, all of us, so that we can normalize the conversation. We can be comfortable with how to respond and support the individual who is giving us warning signs, really, and prevent suicide.
They want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And by having the conversation, and here's the thing. Most teenagers are talking about it. Most teenagers
Right.
are thinking it these
Right.
days.
Right.
It wasn't common back in the 70s, but it is today. And if they're talking about it, we need to be talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about the fact that it will never feel comfortable to have that conversation. I've intervened hundreds of times, and I always have that jolt of, I'm not qualified.
Mm-hmm.
I have been trained so many times. I'm a professional trainer now,
Mm-hmm.
but there still is that uncomfortable feeling. And by empowering people and warning people that you're going to feel uncomfortable, you're going to want to say, I'm not qualified, and duck out of the picture. And as long as you know that that's how you feel and to push through it, and here's what you do. So just make it very simple. You engage in conversation, you listen with empathy,
Mm-hmm.
and then you connect that person with a resource, but you do it together.
Right.
So you don't just say, oh, here's a phone number.
Right.
You say, let's contact the suicide crisis line together, or let's walk to the counselor office together.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not expecting this book to make teachers experts at doing suicide assessments. All we want them to do is to be able to have that conversation, and to be, or if they can't do that, at least eyeball a student and say, that student is at risk or has written a story about a girl who kills herself.
Mm-hmm.
I need to give that to the school counselor.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or paints a picture with blood all over it.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look into this.
Right.
And we need to not, I remember when my son drew a self-portrait in school, and it must have been during the time when there was all this stuff about El Salvador. Well, he wasn't old enough to really understand the political ramifications of all that. Or he didn't really care, because all he cared about was film. And so he did it. The teacher said, draw a self-portrait. So he draws some self-portrait and puts a tattoo of El Salvador on the guy's arm.
Mm-hmm.
Just some kind of random, stupid thing he did. They took him to the psychologist, grilled him all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Mom, I would have said anything to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know. So by educating people more about what people say and do, we're empowering them with the tools to know what to do. And they deserve that.
Absolutely.
It's unfair to put teachers in front of kids every day and not share this knowledge with them, because they want it.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I speak at a school conference, every handout I have is gone. Every book I have is gone. They all sign up for my email list. I mean, I'll go, there'll be 300 people there, 150 people will sign up. That is unprecedented
Mm-hmm.
follow through.
Mm-hmm.
They really want to know what to do, and they want to know what the right thing to do is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have people who are invested in this subject and are hearing it, and they're not being given the tools to do something about it.
Right.
And that's just not fair.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think too that a lot of the, kids, especially with teens, they're telling their friends,
Right.
or saying things. And so it's really important for friends to know, even if it is, knowing the number. And I mean, it could be, let's walk to the school counselor, but even with a phone number, and just staying until your friend calls that number and that they've been connected. And then, if you want to give them privacy or whatever, that's fine. But at least that they've made that contact, and then that counselor on the phone can kind of handle things. But you still want to tell someone so that the
Right.
support
You do
continues.
not keep it a
That
secret.
crisis, that's in that moment, but you still need a longer term therapeutic plan, with really a whole system of professionals, and everybody,
they call it treatment plan.
right, and communicating, and then that, but even in that moment, if it's just that momentary thing, just that little, like what you said, walking with them, or having them call while you're in that presence, and making sure they're connected, and then go tell a teacher or go tell your parents. That there's just so much. But I can't wait until your book comes out, and you have a TED Talk as well, which would be amazing we can see that now, right, on YouTube.
Right.
Yeah.
It's can a blog save lives?
Okay.
And it's 6 minutes, so it's short. It's 6 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. And then, yes, and your website, so listeners can read about, read your blog. I'm sure your books are up there, other information, resources.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of ebooks, coping strategies for grief and loss. I have books for funeral directors. I have books for what do you say if you are a bereavement provider, whether you are a minister, a good friend, you run a support group. What do you say to somebody who's lost someone to suicide? Because it does have some unique points that need to be addressed. And also recognizing when somebody is at risk themselves, because a lot of people who are grief-stricken are at higher risk for suicide. And so you have to recognize those signs as a grief provider when you see that somebody might be at risk.
Very good point. And so your website, or where they can go to for those ebooks and other resources, and to read some very interesting blogs, would be emotionallynaked.com.
Right. And AnnMossRogers.com has the ebooks on there as well.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Well, this concludes our episode for today. And Ann Moss, I thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and the books that you're writing, and educating us and bringing awareness, and the list goes on. I just, you're a remarkable woman, and very, I want to just say, just courageous and inspirational, and so much more. I'm just so grateful to have you on the show, and to get to know you. And I'm going to be, I know, so grateful to read your books.
Well, thank you so much for having the guts to bring up the conversation and start it. Thank you so much, Kimberly. I really appreciate that.
Yes. Well, you're welcome. So concludes our show. Here's to unstoppable teens, unstoppable dreams.